I've known Professor Ganapathy for a great long while, and he was kind enough to invite me to come to this session. And I said, what would you like me to talk about? And he had the title Extraterrestrial Telemedicine. I said, oh, this could be a short talk. I don't know. We'll see. However, I realize that most of you are not clinicians, and we're in a clinical session here, so I better define a little bit what I'm talking about. Telemedicine is the use of communications, telecommunications and information technology to support healthcare at a distance. Just that simple. How to take care of somebody somewhere else. The term came around in 1975 when Dr. Kenneth Bird introduced a little system in Boston. But the requirement and the use of telemetry, understanding what was going on with a life form that you couldn't touch and you couldn't necessarily see, had been around since 1957. This is poor little Laika, who went to space in 1957, did not survive the experience. We didn't know what would happen if you put a life form outside of gravity. We didn't know what would happen if you use these devices. And this dear animal left the surface of the planet with a heart rate of 103, and we knew this moment to moment. The heart rate got as fast as 240 at the maximum number of pulls of G forces, and then resumed 102 when in orbit and weightlessness, and tolerated it very, very well. Unfortunately, the heat system, as we found out from data in 2002, failed, and Laika was lost, and we have a nice statue of Laika in Moscow that was put up in 2008. And I think that must be the first case of full telemetry, trying to apprehend what was going on medically in another place. So what do we have? Space telemedicine. Why do we need healthcare? There are issues of distance and time. There is no possibility for physical intervention. You can't be more isolated. Okay? The risk is extraordinary. There's no return for emergencies. And the task of telemedicine is to predict and mitigate risk, as well as intervene. So what do we have? Well, we have all kinds of goodies, all sorts of things. Now, remembering that what we've done is to take a life form and reduce that to a data set. Okay? And we do that by using sensors. We have all sorts: electrocardiography, respiratory rate, temperature, stethoscope, using otoscope, blood pressure, ophthalmoscope, derm camera, all sorts of things. We can even weigh people, which is a bit of a trick in the weightless environment. And we have a data set to know how a life form is doing over time, and can look at trends, see where is the data set running awry, what can we predict, because there will be no return in the case of emergency. Sensors, proper transmitters, effectors to take a solution back, a medical solution to this extraordinary environment, and fix what's wrong. It may be a drug, or fix something in the environmental controls, or to do something robotic. And process simulation. There aren't enough patients to deal with this. Let me come to that, to have a large experiential base. So we have an officer, a health officer, sitting in Moscow or Houston, who's responsible for the people on the space station now, or whatever the mission is. And they have all of these data flowing to them, and they're sort of massaging the data set. It's a neat information technology matter. They also can pull back from the longitudinal healthcare database of everyone who's ever been in space and see how someone is doing as best as possible. Well, we're dealing with a rather small population. Only 536 people have left the surface of the planet and gone higher than 100 kilometers from Earth. That's a pretty small N to acquire a whole lot of data and to come to some sort of statistical conclusion. They've come from 38 countries. Space travel is extremely ecumenical. We get along very, very nicely in space. Indeed, Rakesh Sharma was the first astronaut, cosmonaut from India, and dear Lord, the Indian-American Kalpana Chawla was lost in the Columbia, a grievous loss for both India and the United States. First human was Yuri Gagarin, a long time ago, 61. He was up there for an hour and 48 minutes. Here's a chap, Polyakov, was on Mir for 437 days. But we're at a point now, just to where is space medicine going? 2015 becomes the routine stay of 1 year. We're up there 1 year, and the first group for this will include Commander Kelly, the husband of Gabby Gifford, one of our House of Representatives people from years past, and he will have an identical twin to act as his medical control on Earth for everything he does in terms of health for 1 year. The N is small. The ethics of experimentation are extraordinarily difficult, as it is in doing experimentation with isolated and vulnerable populations, I would say. We have to be careful and do the right thing. So, on Space Station, it's been continuously occupied since 2000. It's a heavy thing. The habitable volume is about a 6-bedroom house, the pressurized volume, and it's about the same also as a Boeing 777. And all the seats are business class. Some of it's pretty uncomfortable. The solar array generates 84 kilowatts. I mean, it's a big thing. It orbits about every 93 minutes. Now, you want to talk about mobility. The patient circles the Earth every 93 minutes. And the Earth is moving wide at the equator at 1,000 miles. So it's mobile. You catch things on the fly. It's a pretty good environment. Usual gas tensions, 1 atmosphere of pressure. And the space station, up since 2000, has been the place where we've practiced the most space medicine, the most space extraterrestrial telemedicine. It's up there about 150 miles from us. You can see it. You can go to a website and they'll tell you where to look for it in the sky, and it goes by about every 93 minutes. It's not very homey, but it's the place where the patient is, and a lot of our patients in rural and isolated areas, they live in rather uncomfortable circumstances, and so do these dear people. They are protected by an environmental support system of extraordinary complexity, and the idea is to get them up there and get them back without difficulty. One of the statements in NASA that applies terribly much to space telemedicine is that failure is not an option. These are not sick people. They're not supposed to get hurt. Nothing should happen to them that we could not have predicted and avoided. Pretty high expectation, but that's the way it is. We want them to get to the back. By the way, they land in a cloud like a plop here in the desert, in the steppes in Kazakhstan. And you may have remembered early on in space medicine, space travel, people would leap with great raised hands and victory signs to get out of the spacecraft, and they look so heroic and athletic and so forth. Not so much anymore. This is Commander Mikata coming back from Expedition 39 last May. And after a long period in space, you can't prevent everything. Even with the best space telemedicine, when you come back, you can't stand up. You're in a basket. They drag you from the spacecraft, from the Soyuz that's bringing you back. You're dizzy, and you aren't able to really walk for many hours back in a 1G environment. So that's to say, space travel makes you a little bit ill and vulnerable, and that has to be treated too. What are the risks? What are we worried about in health? I just showed you what someone looks like coming back. Radiation. In low Earth orbit, as we are now, it's not such a problem. But the challenge is we leave the Van Allen belt, which runs out about 20,000 kilometers and protects us from the heaviest of the radiation that comes in the way of cosmic rays. When we get beyond that, we don't know exactly what people are going to do. We just don't know, and that's the great adventure and the great courage of our international space travelers. The Van Allen belt is out there, and Mars, we won't have it. Mineral loss. We thought that people were going to just have to sustain that. They would be osteoporotic if they were in space long enough. Space medicine, telemedicine monitored and looked and looked and looked, and how can we fix it? And now with resistant exercise devices, it doesn't happen anymore. Figure it out. Got it treated. Do the mitigation. So, visual problems. This is new. We knew cataracts would be a problem, but there's a problem of having fluids distributed in the body. And we can monitor this. We've known it for years. Now we know what it does. It causes papilledema. You end up with excessive pressure in the brain and visual problems, and we'll get that fixed because we can do the telemetry, we can do the telemedicine and get it fixed. Well, just by the way, injury, the greatest chance of injury we can't do much about, and that's micrometeorites and orbital debris. I don't know if you watched the movie Gravity. I'm not going to watch it again because that actually could happen. You get hit by the big one there. Okay. These crafts are wonderful, and as a data set, we've come to think of the human as part of the overall data set for the most complicated devices ever invented by our species. Okay? They're just one panel, and they need to work. But they have to work with everything else. We've done partnerships. The U.S. has been part of it. Our biggest partnership has been, of course, with Russia in terms of doing this. And I might say that telemedicine for extraterrestrial activities has been declared apolitical. And even in the worst of circumstances, maybe right now is not so good, we work with the Russians and with the Japanese and the Germans and the Indians and so forth. So it's kind of nice, and I'd like to think that telemedicine is like that in all of our other activities, and I believe it largely is. So we maintain health. We can't get back to Earth. Remember that the interventionalist is not, if there's something happens, like an injury, there's no crew physician, so we have to do just-in-time teaching to teach the uninstructed healthcare worker in a very remote place to do something, and the telemedicine becomes semi-autonomous because in going to Mars, the perigee is 401 million kilometers. We're not going to get back from that. It really is the ultimate in a dangling conversation. The round-trip speed of light messaging to something on Mars is 28 minutes. The average is 28. The maximum is 44 minutes. That's a very long silence. There'll be no robotics, so it has to be semi-autonomous. You're not coming back, and we'll do our very, very best using the lessons of telemedicine and remembering something that's an ancient concept. This came down from Imhotep, who designed the step pyramid at Saqqara and also authored the Edwin Smith papyrus, we believe. And he said about health care, he was a physician, "Thou shalt say concerning him, this is an ailment which I will treat. This is an ailment I will not treat because it's hopeless. This is an ailment with which I will contend." And I think that's where we are in healthcare in the world, no matter where we are now, and it certainly applies to extraterrestrial medicine. We won't fix everything. We will lose people, but we'll try to expand this area with which we can contend. So it's a dangerous place, but a terribly exciting place. And I think that the reality is that we're going to have better tools and better information management and a steadily growing database from which to work with regard to sensors and the software and so forth. The tools we have now, other than the basics that I mentioned, have expanded to ultrasound. We can't get radiography, but oh my gosh, the things we're learning in extraterrestrial telemedicine with radiology, using ultrasound as the energy to diagnose all manner of things. And we're evolving some surgical capability with small robotics that we can use. You hit the activate button and it activates whenever the speed of light gets there. Well, there's a lot of territory out there. It's a very great universe, and to think that we're going to send humans is not an outrageous assumption. It is going to happen. And in conclusion, let me just say that telemedicine as telemetry pretty much was defined in the needs for space travel. There was no way to get around telemetry and telemedicine to do extraterrestrial work. It's been evolving over 50 years. Thus far, terrestrial medicine has learned some terribly interesting things from extraterrestrial telemedicine. As the experience grows in space, the remarkable success in telemedicine for space to identify and mitigate risk is keeping up. But the challenges coming forward, especially the Van Allen belt, and let me mention one other. We don't know what our life form does when it's no longer in a magnetosphere. When we leave magnetic forces on our way to Mars, there's a mild one, but not very much of one, is that conceivable? Is that compatible with our life form? We'll let you know, I guess, because there's no way to find out now, okay? We're going to have an opportunity to solve problems of patients in remote and isolated areas and for patients at home. I always think of the astronauts and the cosmonauts as being in a very fragile home environment, and certainly that's the case for a lot of our patients we send home. Well, with that note, I'll say thank you. I hope it's been of some interest, and keep watching what happens in space telemedicine, extraterrestrial telemedicine, because I strongly believe that, as has been the case in the last 50 years, there may be some very interesting clues and tools and nuances that we can apply for our most vulnerable populations on Earth. Thank you.